Let's talk.
John Trow.
We're talking about my favourite subject, Plantagenets. We're getting down and dirty. We're chevauching with the best of them because there's a new book out by a guest that I've had in before, and he's bracing himself for this one, somewhat like the flower of French chivalry should have done at one of the battles, but in fact, 2 or 3 of the battles we're talking about, because we're talking about the English Bowman in the 100 Years' War, the secret weapon of the Middle Ages. And I'm delighted to say that we're bringing our own secret weapon because we're joined once again by MJ Trow. Good morning to you, MJ.
Morning, Charles. How are you?
I'm very well. As you can probably tell, I'm a little bit excited about catching up with this because I'm currently... I'm currently... You see, I was... Until about 3 years ago, I had woefully neglected my Plantagenets, as the saying goes, a steady madam at the back. And then I spoke with Dan Jones, of course, who is a historian that some of you may have heard of out there. And he said to me, you really ought to, if you like your stuff and, you know, you're getting all carried away with your Andalusian and your Huns and stuff like that, have a look at the Plantagenets. And I looked, and from Henry I onwards, I was smitten. Ellen of Aquitaine, you know, the what should have been the biggest English empire that has ever been, etc., etc., etc. And the Longbowman is an absolute game changer. So let's take it back before I completely sort of bedazzle the listeners and confuse them as always. So where do we start with this one, MJ? How do we kick off with this? Because I mean, there is a lot of legend and there's a lot of sort of English propaganda built up, rightfully so, but we tend to look at it as a sort of, you know, once more into the breach, dear friends. Ouch, zut alors that stang, as the French would say.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Where to start? My original idea was to compare 2 wars, the 100 Years' War, particularly Battle of Agincourt, 1415, and the Battle of Waterloo, exactly 400 years later, to compare the British soldier in both campaigns. Then, as my publisher quite rightly pointed out, we've done far too much on Wellington and the Peninsula and Waterloo, so just stick to the 100 Years' War. So I did. But the great problem about doing that is that although we know a great deal about your blessed Plantagenets, and by the way, today was the birthday of Edward III by sheer coincidence, we don't know anything really about his soldiers, about the rank and file, about the ordinary guys who won his battles for him. And it's really very difficult then to get information that we need.
The thing is, though, I mean, and also that we tend to be Agincourt-centric, because, spoiler alert, and many Englishmen will be dropping their Airfix models of Henry V in shock, but the English lost the 100 Years' War. We don't talk about that. And we woefully, because it's Agincourt-centric, we woefully don't look at Cressy, which, if you like, is the blueprint. And if you look at Agincourt and Cressy, I mean, props to, you know, Edward, you know, respect, as the kids would say, to Henry V, because he's obviously done his backstory, while as the French army, and the whole concept of France is something else we talk about, but they haven't. And if it only looked through the scriptures of the Constable and put that bleeding banner down, they might have had more of a fighting chance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the reason that Henry V and Agincourt dominates, of course, is dear old Shakespeare. Because of his play Henry V, we all know once more to the breach, dear friends. But Shakespeare didn't write anything about the 100 Years' War before that, and that's a shame. Had he written about Edward III, the Black Prince, Cressy, Poitiers, etc., then I think that would be right up there with Henry V, and we'd all know all about it. But the fact is, it didn't happen, and we don't. But you're right, Cressy was very much the blueprint of how to win a medieval battle. And the fact that the French didn't learn from the mistakes there is frankly astounding.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up, to be honest. They had umpteen chances to put it right, and they didn't take them.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna drop my bits in, and then I will let you speak, MJ, because I'm getting carried away. But two of my favourite bits from Cressy, or favourite bits or whatever, are the Genoese crossbowmen who have a really awful time that day. And, you know, as Italians, they must have thought, well, forget this for a game of soldiers. I'm being trampled by both sides. But also, Otto, it's the Battle of the Five Kings, Cressy. And the one who strikes me, apart from the Black Prince almost beating his maker early, is Otto of Bohemia, who is just, you know, he's blind, he is led into, he's strapped to, he's got knights, his guard on either side of him, and he rides pell-mell into the melee. And you just think, now that's a pair of, as we say in Spain, cojones, like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, the guts of these guys is just phenomenal. Yeah, he was blind. He was determined, though, to strike a blow physically himself with his sword. And so he had his knights rope themselves to his horse. There he was in the centre of, I guess, a couple of dozen of them. And they charged the English lines. And, of course, they were all killed. At the end of the battle, they find his body. And it is said that Edward the Black Prince took his famous three feathers and the Ich dien, I serve motto from in a kind of homage to him, really. Black Prince was like that. He was very much into chivalry. He believed that kind of thing implicitly, and he was very, very impressed by the Bohemian line. It was extremely good. You mentioned the Genoese crossbowmen, and yeah, this is right. What happened there, of course, was that the French cavalry, in other words, the knights, were so anxious to get at the English that they rode down their own men. The Genoese crossbowmen are in the front of the French army, and they're firing their crossbows, but the knights are saying, get out of the way, we want to mix it with the English, and they trampled them completely. I mean, talk about friendly fire. It doesn't begin to describe it, really.
Well, not only that, so they can't get their other thing, which is because and we'll slow it down, but just quickly, they can't get their big shields from the baggage train, which are at the back of the line, because logistics make an army, and we can all go on about that. So they haven't got time to set up. So they're going in there without the one thing, because a crossbow takes an awfully long time and an awful lot of physical effort to load, whereas a longbow doesn't. So they don't get their big shields to hide behind, and we're talking big shields like surfboards. And so therefore they are really left in the middle of it. And you know, like I said, ouch, that stings a bit. Right, let's go back, though, to what a medieval army is like before the longbow, because, you know, and we can call it, you know, because there are no longbowmen at Hastings, for example. There are no longbowmen at those early battles of what you would call the sort of, I don't know, the Middle Ages, if that's the way to put it.
Well, that's exactly right. If you look at, say, the Bayeux Tapestry, which was made about 1070, and shows the whole Senlac campaign, the whole Norman invasion by William, Duke of Normandy, there are very few archers shown. The bows they're firing are what some people call short bows. That is, they're pulled back to the chest to be fired, whereas the later English longbow, you pull it back to your right ear to be fired, which means that the range is far greater. The bows were small, the range wasn't good. We only have one depiction in the Bayeux Tapestry of a mounted archer, and that's in the rout at the end, when the English shield wall is broken, the Saxons are scattering, and the Normans are really wiping them off the field. So it's unlikely there were many mounted archers at all. But without the longbow, without that power weapon, 6 foot long, with a range of 260, 270 yards, then you don't have that killing machine. It's like going into a First World War battle with no machine gun. You are very, very limited in what you can achieve.
And yeah, the thing is, what we see here is as the campaign. So the 100 Years' War, when it kicks off, I mean, they don't think, okay, here's a war that's going to go for 100 years. And let's get a couple of things straight as well. You know, we are looking at England, but England has substantial holdings in modern-day France. And the French army is not France as we would know it today, because the French are doing what the French do best, you know, between the Burgundians and the other side, the Angevins, I think is the correct one.
Armagnacs. Yeah.
And they're doing what they do better. It's basically the Burgundians are doing mass disruption, and as only they can do, because they're a separate sort of dukedom, whatever. So it's not the whole of France. It is basically the Seine, Paris, that sort of situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. France was much smaller than it is today. It wasn't a unified whole at all. And England, although physically smaller, geographically smaller, was nevertheless united. Okay, we had little annoyances like the Welsh and the Scots, and don't get me started on the Irish, but essentially, England is a unity, and everybody hangs together and fights for a common cause. That doesn't happen in France. You're quite right. In the south, the whole Aquitaine area was claimed by the English anyway as being theirs. So was Normandy. You got the Burgundians on the edge of the whole thing in what today would be the Rhine and modern Belgium, which of course didn't exist in the Middle Ages. And yeah, it is chaotic, and it's not too surprising, to be honest, that the French lost the early battles of the war and did so badly. It's only when they finally get their act together with artillery that they realise, hey, we can do this. We've got something we can match the English with.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, so who comes up with the idea of the longbow then? I mean, there's somebody sort of sitting there going, you know what? That tree looks rather splendid. All I got to do is whittle that down a bit, you know, and as the nearest goose walks by and goes, bing! Oh, that'll make it excellent. Quiver for me or whatever. I mean, how does what is, because as before we've had short bows, we've had crossbows. So the longbow, where's its genesis?
Well, we don't have an individual. I'd like to say, that was Tom Scroggs in 1104.
Nottingham, yes. So the following was in Sherwood.
But there is no one individual. It is just the evolution of weapons, which happens all the time. Weapons are constantly evolving. If you think of guns, they have developed too over a very, very long time. And I think it was just accident. There are two areas in Britain, if you like, where the longbow seems to have originated. One is my own native South Wales, and the other is Cheshire, particularly the area around Macclesfield. Why that should be so, I don't know. You must remember that the bow was a hunting weapon. It wasn't really intended for war at all. But if you can kill a deer with an arrow, you can kill a man with an arrow as well. So essentially, it's the same thing. And all over a very heavily forested England, you must remember there were trees everywhere then, which there aren't now, you had men who were foresters. They made a living out of hunting, and it has to be said, conserving forests, even as early as that. And they carried bows. And those bows became more powerful and better. Incidentally, the kind of bow you see in Hollywood movies and the kind of bow that I used to use as a kid is called a flat bow. And that is not what we're talking about. The long bow was round and it was 6 foot tall. Right. Whereas the kind of bows you see Kevin Costner using as Robin Hood.
That great historical document, you mean, where he lands in England via Hadrian's Wall. Yes, that one, yes.
Absolutely. Having said that, I did love it, but that's beside the point. They're not accurate representations of the medieval longbow at all. We know what they were like because, of course, we found several aboard the ship the Mary Rose that was sunk in the 1540s. And even though the 1540s is a long time after the 100 Years' War, exactly the same kind of bows were still being used.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to think, history is like, okay, muskets come in, bows stop, or cannon come in, bows stop. It doesn't work like that because there are bows. There are cannon at Cressy, aren't there? I mean, he's got cannon at Cressy, which make people think what? Because they're starting to bring these. I mean, I think it's basically to frighten the horses more than anything else. Now, we have this idea of the yeomen of England. He says, slapping, and it's panto scene, slapping his thigh, hearty slaps on the back and all doing the things for good, for the Black Prince and the whole thing. Let's get some things straight about what we might think about medieval warfare, because the Middle Ages, they are a time of enlightenment in certain things. We have, the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine and her courtly love, etc. But, and that she's not the ex, by the way, of Kurt Cobain, but let's move swiftly onwards. But, I thought you'd like that. But, if you think that medieval warfare is about battles, it's not, because a battle is the last thing you really want to do in the medieval warfare. What you want is a siege, right? And to grind them down. And what you want if you're a marauding prince, be you Edward or the Black Prince or a king or whatever, is a chevauchée. And a chevauchée is absolutely horrendous. Explain, please.
Chevauchée just means a ride in French, and that's what it was. It was a raid of the countryside. So you've got Edward III, you've got the Black Prince, you've got Henry V. They all play it the same way. They land at a particular port, and then they move inland. And they are moving in a direction. They're going towards a city because they know that there are valuables there and there's food there. And on the way to the city, they will pass umpteen villages and towns, and they will destroy them. Now, you've got this dichotomy in the 100 Years' War. At the top, the princes and the kings and the knights all supposedly believe in this idea you've already mentioned of chivalry, which is a glorified ideal of essentially good and noble behavior. In practice, it very, very rarely happened, and it certainly didn't exist among the rank and file. The goddams, as the French call the English bowmen, didn't understand chivalry. They didn't know what it was all about. They were there for the takings. Bearing in mind their pay was twopence a day, which is minute. The Black Prince paid himself £1 a day, which is 120 times what the bowmen got. Then these guys were poor. They were peasants. And here was a chance to grab anything they could, be it food, be it wine, be it women, silver, gold, didn't matter really, grab it. The only thing they were not allowed to do was to attack churches, because the leader of the campaign, be it the Black Prince or whoever it was, specifically said, don't do that. I'm sure it happened. I'm sure from time to time some churches were sacked. After all, priests are unarmed. They're not going to fight back, and you just help yourself to the gold and silver. So the chevauchée was a little bit like the Blitz in World War II. You hit the civilian population, and you hit them as hard as you can, because that, you hope, is going to force the government of the day to give up, to surrender, to say, we can't cope with this, the war is over. It didn't happen any more than it happened in World War II, but it's the same idea.
And of course, you've only got a set period of time, because it's not, very rarely do you get sieges that last over the winter, because you have campaigning season, because the bowmen of England, it's not a professional army, they've got to go back and tend to their fields or look after their forests. So they've got, this is happening in the summer months. So you go in at the beginning of the season, when the weather turns fair and you can sail across without getting blown to the Azores, and you land, you top your hat at Gascony, and off you go, and it's scorched earth, it's rape and pillage, it's great, you eat, you drink, you rape, you do whatever, and you hopefully drive the townspeople into the cities. There you get crowded with people. The sewage system isn't as good as perhaps it's going to be in Victorian times. Disease breaks out, and then you go up to with a very few exceptions, like Caen, for example, in the north, which happens in 1516 or 1517. They can't defend. And they basically give up. So that is what is happening on to ground to the ground level troops. Also, there are. I mean the idea of the, again, go back to courtly thing. If I am Sir Gilles of Lessin, I'm a French nobleman. I know it's difficult to imagine here in my baseball cap, and I'm just dusting the soot off my mitre or whatever. I've got a fairly good chance of surviving what's going on, because I am a high-level nobleman, and therefore I am a payday to anybody who takes me. And I have been, and I speak French, and the English speak French, and we have met at tournaments, because that's a thing to keep going. You're laughing, but it's absolutely, it's true, isn't it? We'll be bashing each other around at a tournament, almost like Premier League football. There's, what's his name, Bossonnet, the most famous French knight of them all, etc., who is big mates with Henry V, etc. So ransom is a big thing. If I get captured, I know pretty much well that I'm going to be surviving. Even if the rabble are trying to decapitate me like you would do a lobster in a 5-star restaurant, it's I've got a fair chance. If my English noble mate grabs me, he can ransom me, and I can be back home in my chateau by the end of the season.
Yeah, the ransom thing was a big scam, really, and you're quite right. You don't kill the nobility of the other side. You take them prisoner instead. They nobly surrender, and they spend a couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years, perhaps in captivity until somebody pays their ransom. The classic case is King John of France, Jean le Bel, who was defeated at Poitiers and spent years in a very comfortable captivity, in inverted commas, in England. He had a whale of a time. It was marvellous. He was just the honoured guest of the Prince of Wales, whereas the men who fought for him, the rank and file, were either dead or starving, or, as you say, had to go back to their day job, which was actually farming. We don't have a truly professional army in this country until essentially the 1660s. Before that, they're all amateurs, part-timers.
How does he keep discipline? How do the various kings then keep discipline within English ranks? Because if you're sitting there, Cressy, it doesn't look good. If you're sitting there at Agincourt, it looks even worse. Poitiers a bit different because the French are doing what the French do best, which is, cooking something up nice and generally lounging about and being terribly Gallic. It's true. They're not expecting it. I love Poitiers because it's one of those situations, and then there's a salé and I like a good salé on a Thursday. But you see what I'm saying? Because you're sitting there, you've got, you are there in your doublet and hose or whatever. You've got your longbow. You've got, you're keeping your bowstrings dry, which will come into this thing. Now, you've got a rapid rate of fire. Yeah. So, you can loose these things. But at the same time, you've got a row of stakes in front of you, but you're looking across at the French, again, they don't learn the French, but they just come steaming. And, we know, because of the benefit of hindsight, that how it's going to pan out. But if you have... There's dysentery going, which is a killer going through the ranks. You've been marching on an empty stomach for 3 or 4 days, because you haven't been able to chevaucher. You're cold, you wet, you're miserably hungry, you want to go home, and then you look across and it's, oh, look out, here comes this, and it is the full-on armor-plated banners. What's the French now? The standard, the French, they bring out, the almost religious one they bring out, so that they always keep losing, getting nicked. Is it the that begins with a B?
The oriflamme.
That's the one.
Oriflamme?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Well, part of that, I suppose, is the feudal system. The fact that as a peasant, you fought for your lord. You wore his badge on your sleeve. All your life, you had done that. You worked for the lord on his estates at home. You fought for the lord. If he said, we're nipping off to France and you're coming with me, you went. And you didn't give that a thought. You've got the peasant revolt, by the way, in the middle of all this in 1381, where Wat Tyler and co. go on the rampage to say, enough of this, we're tired of taking orders, we're not going to do it anymore. But that was a one-off, and it was very, very quickly put down.
And also that's against Richard. That's against not the king, but the people who are controlling the king. So Richard II, in the only decent thing he'll do in his entire reign, he manages to placate Wat Tyler, and then he goes back in his word and nobody gets slaughtered. But the king is still held in. We are doing this for King Richard II in the same way, I suppose, that they're doing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. As a 14-year-old, which is extraordinary, the young Richard II rides out to Smithfield in front of these mob of peasants, calms them down, says, "Whatever you want, I'll give you." He didn't mean a word of it, but at the time it sounded right, and that is quite an extraordinary moment. It's a seminal point, really, in English history. What fascinates me is that some of the men who were with Tyler would have been the longbowmen of the 100 Years' War. On the other hand, some of them were still fighting for the king.
Well, Richard II's heavies were from Cheshire, weren't they? A lot of Richard II's heavies, when he was trying to, usurp the usurper, they're from Cheshire. And therefore, as we said before, they're the Cheshire Bowmen.
Yeah, absolutely so. And this is why it's so frustrating that we don't have any information about these rank and file guys, because we don't know who they were. We have the names of about half a dozen men, perhaps 10, archers who fought at Agincourt, but that's all. I mean, Shakespeare talks about the Agincourt roll. In Henry V, he mentions the name of 3 or 4 people who've been killed in the battle. And he says after that, none else of name. In other words, nobody who's important, so we won't worry about them. And that's the point. Nobody worried about them. They didn't make a list, and it's sheer chance that we have the names of a handful of archers from Agincourt itself.
So how do you go down then and actually manage to put together? Is it battlefield archaeology? Have you used sort of reports at the time? Because we sort of know, and we're always discovering more about what the day-to-day drudgery life was of the middle to late period.
Very little archaeology has been done, as far as I know, in France. And the battlefields of the 100 Years' War. We've done quite a bit in England, particularly the Wars of the Roses, which isn't that much later, of course. The Battle of Castillon, which is the last battle of the 100 Years' War, is 1453. 2 years later, the Wars of the Roses start in England, York versus Lancaster. Now, we know from battlefields like Towton in 1461 how these men died. We know the wounds that killed them. It also applies to Richard III, of course, found under the famous car park in Leicester with his head wounds. So we know how he died. We know from the bodies of the Mary Rose ship that archers were quite deformed. Because they were practicing with their bows from the age of 7, their right shoulders and arms are much more powerful than their left because they're constantly pulling back the bowstring. And the bones show that deformity. It's only slight, but it is very significant, and it's there. And you can tell a bowman from his bones straight away.
Fascinating. I hadn't thought of that before, but presumably if he's got like a right arm that you could fell an oak with. He's a bowman, isn't he, basically?
He's a bowman, absolutely. That's right, yeah. Some archaeologists think that I think it's really silly. The developed arms were because of hauling ropes on board ship. But when you haul ropes on board ship, you use both hands. You don't just use one. So they have to be archers, yeah.
Was it a shock and awe? Was the longbow a shock and awe weapon? I mean, it must. I mean, because again, the French, Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt. The French don't learn. They don't keep the discipline, and that is perhaps the defining. Because if the French knights had got in amongst the men at arms, who are basically knights who've dismounted, and the longbow-men, if they got in amongst them, game over. We would be not celebrating Agincourt. We would certainly not be celebrating Crécy. The whole lineage could have been completely changed. As it is, and the longbow comes to be regarded with, I mean, it's legend. We talk about English bowmen even now. I mean, even, the 21st century people, if you say English longbowmen, they'll go Henry V. Simple as that.
You're right. The once you mix it, once you've got within bow range, inside bow range, face-to-face with your opponent, the bow is useless. All you can do is batter somebody with it, and it's a bit of wood, so it's not going to do that much damage, to be honest. The importance of the bow is the distance. We're talking about 250 yards or more killing capacity. So for 250 yards, you have got arrows coming down. We can't imagine what that must have been like. Everybody who witnessed it and wrote accounts refers to it as like hail, like snow, like the most appalling downpour you have ever been in. The noise must have been horrendous. The hiss, first of all, through the air, and the thud as it hits the shield, the man, the horse, the ground. It must have been ghastly. And by the way, viewers who watch medieval films, like me, can I say that they used to kill horses first?
Yeah.
You don't see this in Hollywood. In Hollywood, you see the guy go down, the horse rolls over, gets up and walks away. No. You aim for the horse because the horse is the biggest target. Bring the horse down, that throws its rider. He is then trampled by the guys behind, and you have absolute chaos and devastation. So that was the importance of the bowmen. That was their skill. They'd won the battle before it had started, really.
Yeah, and of course, once you've got...
We're talking about firing 14 arrows a minute. And we're talking about 3,000 men doing that, then that impact must have been unbelievable. I really can't imagine what that must have been like.
And also, of course, after that first wave of destructions, in both Crécy and in Agincourt, the French knights retreat and they go, oh, we'll go again, it'll work this time. And the carnage builds up and they've got knights wandering around, days, they've got dead horses, the ground's churned up. It's an absolute quagmire.
Absolutely, particularly in Agincourt. If you've seen the Henry V film with Laurence Olivier, it's appalling. It's a great film, but the battle is fought in Ireland for a start, where it was filmed. The sunshine is gorgeous, the fields are wide open, and it's brilliant. Nothing like that. The Kenneth Branagh version is much better. It was pouring down with rain. It had been for days. There was mud everywhere, and the actual battlefield is a very narrow area between two thick woods. So there wasn't the space. Shakespeare writes about the vasty fields of France, but not at Agincourt. There was nothing like it.
What are you hoping? As you can tell, I could talk you through this until St. Swithin's Day, but I'm going to run out of time. Where can people find you online to continue the conversation, MJ?
Oh, good Lord. Well, my publisher is Pen and Sword of Barnsley, and you can find me, MJ Trow, at live.co.uk.
The book is called The English Bowman in the 100 Years' War. It's by MJ Trow. I'm going to run out of time. MJ, we have cried havoc and let slip the dogs. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Gilles. It's been great.